There's a running back in this division who won a lot of fantasy leagues last year, but he did it with some fake numbers. Now, don't get me wrong, he gained all the yards, caught all the passes, and scored all the touchdowns he got credit for. But he also just might be the biggest regression candidate of 2025. Want to know who he is and who you should draft instead? Lucky for you, an all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola here to break down every team in the AFC East. This is episode 2 in our divisional preview series. We hit the NFC East earlier this week. 6 more shows following this one. Subscribe, follow, like right now so you don't miss an installment of the series. You're going to learn about every team. You're going to hear players we're targeting, players we're fading, and really all the guys in between who matter. Jared, let's jump right into the AFC East. We're starting with the Buffalo Bills. What happened with this team last season?
Yeah, it was another good offensive season for the Bills last year. They finished 10th in the league in total yards. They were second in points. Despite this being a slow-paced and run-leaning offense, the Bills ranked 21st in offensive pace. They were 28th in plays. They were also 28th in pass rate. So that left them 26th in the NFL in pass attempts as a team. They were 9th in rushing than what we saw from the Bills under OC Joe Brady. Brady took over halfway through that 2023 season. Over those final 7 games of 2023, the Bills were a 48% pass rate. They leaned a bit more on the pass last year, but that's now a season and a half under offensive coordinator Joe Brady of this being a run-leaning offense, despite having one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, and really, I think the message from that is this offense produced points because it has that quarterback. Josh Allen is able to put up those points even if the OC is not really designing things in a way that necessarily helps him propel that scoring. What's new for this year? Not a whole lot. The coaching staff is back intact, probably on at least a mild hot seat. I think that Buffalo, whether it be the city or the franchise, is ready to see this team actually at least get to the Super Bowl, ideally win a Super Bowl, instead of just getting close, being one of the best teams in the AFC. We'll see what that means for anybody involved. Probably not a whole lot of fantasy relevance. Josh Palmer is the biggest offensive addition to the team, which is to say not a whole lot's changing on offense for this team. They paid Josh Palmer too much, I would say. I don't think he's going to be as big a factor as $15 million a year would suggest, but he's there, and we'll talk about what he means for fantasy drafts later. More changes to the personnel on defense, but really, Jared, we're looking at a very similar Bills team to what we got last season.
Yeah, don't forget about Elijah Moore. They added him as well. If you're waiting for the Elijah Moore 6th-year breakout or whatever, we'll see if it comes in Buffalo. And the only departure from this offense, the only significant departure is Amari Cooper, who joined this team in the middle of last season, did not make much of an impact. He averaged just 3.6 targets per game for Buffalo last year. He had a game with like 14 targets. I think it was that crazy Rams game. Other than that, he was not a factor. So there's really not much new in this offense heading into 2025.
Yeah, Amari Cooper joined the team middle of last year, left it shortly thereafter, and then the season ended. As for draft targets, it's a tough team for me to want to target. I'll start with Keon Coleman because he is on 20% of my drafters rosters so far for the whole year since the very beginning of best ball season. I got more of him before the NFL draft than since. Not that I dislike him at this point, but he is going a little bit earlier than he was. Wide receiver 53 on Underdog, same range on drafters. He was more of a target for me earlier in that time frame, though, because right now he's got Trey Harris and Rashid Shaheed right behind him in ADP. I like both of those guys, probably more than Keon Coleman. And then on drafters, Brandon Ayuk is even going behind Keon Coleman, which we'll talk more about Brandon Ayuk when we get to that division, but that's a silly range for him to be going regardless of what the question is on him. So I still like Keon Coleman, not quite as much of a target as he was for me earlier in draft season.
Yeah, you're right that this is a tough team to really like guys from in drafts. I mean, their whole mantra is everybody eats. Josh Allen says that every single press conference. They want to be a spread the wealth team in terms of playing time and touches. A lot of these guys are not full-time players. They spread the ball around. They're going to rotate 4-5 wide receivers in, depending on how you consider Dalton Kincaid. He's basically an oversized wide receiver for this team. That said, Keon Coleman is my favorite target on this team, a lot because of his price. He's wide receiver 53 in ADP. We have him 7 spots higher than that in our wide receiver rankings. You could just make this argument simple. Like, this is a 22-year-old former 33rd overall pick in last year's draft, heading into his second season on a high-scoring offense. That alone, at a wide receiver 3 price tag, makes me want to take shots on Keon Coleman, who I didn't even love as a prospect. There are definitely limitations to his game. He is not going to, I don't think, develop into a true number one wide receiver, but he doesn't have to at this price. I think he was coming on last year before his wrist injury. His 2 games prior to the wrist injury, 4 catches for 125 yards, 5 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. Then he hurts his wrist, misses the next 2 or 3 games, and is just not the same player the rest of the way. That might have prevented a mini breakout as a rookie. I think we're getting him at a discount because that wrist injury stopped him from doing much over the second half of last season.
And for me, Keon Coleman's going to be more of a best ball guy than he is a lineup setting player, because even though I think he could very well be the most productive Bills receiver, I think we're going to see things spread around a bit too much for him to be somebody that we comfortably start week to week in an average sized fantasy football league. Certainly still somebody you can draft, but not a player I'm specifically going to target for my lineup setting teams. Ray Davis is showing up on plenty of my teams for best ball and for redraft. 17% of my drafters rosters since the NFL draft. He's the number 2 running back on a team where I don't believe in the number 1. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but I'm getting plenty of Ray Davis, not because I'm specifically going after him, but because he makes plenty of sense to me in the range where he's going.
For sure. And we're actually a little behind ADP on Davis now. That's changed. I think he's climbing in ADP. He definitely hasn't moved in our rankings, but I still like him as a target if I'm looking for a running back in that range. Ray Davis is a high-end handcuff. Again, Buffalo did not add anything else to this backfield. It's James Cook, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson, who's an undersized pass-catching back. If James Cook misses time this season, we saw it last year. James Cook missed week 6. Ray Davis in that game, 20 carries for 97 yards, 3 catches for 55 yards. So he was the workhorse back and also contributed in the passing game a bit. At minimum, you're getting a high-end handcuff. I think there's a chance for more. James Cook only played 48% of the Bills' offensive snaps last year. They rotated in Ray Davis. They rotated in Ty Johnson. So there's snaps available. Davis does bring more size than James Cook. He's 211 pounds, I believe, at like 5'8". He's a stocky, powerful running back. Ray Davis was 9th among 47 qualifying running backs last year in missed tackles forced per carry. So I know the overall production wasn't huge. Even some efficiency stuff like yards per carry wasn't great last year, but you look under the hood, there was some stuff to like about Ray Davis's rookie season. But this Bills team, again, we talked about it being a run leaning team, and Josh Allen is a big part of that. But the Bills as a team scored the 4th most running back PPR points last year. So even if James Cook is the clear leader, there's room for another running back on this team to, at least be like an RB3 flex eligible, type of producer.
There's another Bill who is tied with Ray Davis in my player exposures right now, and it's Dalton Kincaid, same 17% in that same time frame since the NFL draft. It's really more of a signal of how I draft tight ends than specifically me trying to get Dalton Kincaid. He's going outside the top 12 in ADPs, tied with Hunter Henry as my most drafted tight end since the NFL draft. If I'm not taking an elite tight end and I'm not targeting the top 2 guys, I'm not even really getting all that much George Kittle. I'll get a little bit more Travis Kelce. I'm certainly in on David Njoku, but oftentimes I just kind of let it go until tight end makes sense for me. Either I need one or I don't like the guys available at other positions. And that's where Dalton Kincaid fits. He's right around tight end 14 in ADP across sites. That's significantly lower than he was the past 2 years. And people are out on him collectively because he let us down at those higher levels of expectations the past 2 years. But what he did do was rank 10th among tight ends in target share last year. That's the same place he was second half of his rookie year. So he's getting plenty of target share. He looks like a good bet to be the number 2 target on this Bills team again this year. And even if he just does that and he's fine as a performer, he'll do just fine as either an earlier tight end 2 or a late tight end 1, whether you're talking best ball or lineup setting. I like Dalton Kincaid there, even if I'm not excited about the upside. And frankly, we don't know what the upside is yet, because if he is fully healthy this year, if he is more physically developed and ready to tap into more of the ability that got him drafted in the first round not that long ago, then there certainly might be production upside beyond what we've seen so far, the kind of stuff that we were chasing the past 2 years at his higher ADP.
Yeah, I think the injuries are the key point here. We know Dalton Kincaid had a PCL sprain in his left knee in week 10. That cost him the next 3 games, and he never seemed like he was fully healthy for the rest of the way. He also had the other injury in his right knee. It was a Morel-Lavallée lesion, which I Googled this. It's the skin underneath the knee fills with fluid. It's a rare injury. I had never heard of it before. That was in the other knee in week 16. So 2 separate knee injuries for Dalton Kincaid last year, I think definitely played a factor. His biggest issue is really playing time. He was 25th among tight ends in route rate last year. He ran a route on just 62% of the Bills' pass plays. Everything else was really strong. As you said, Matt, 19.7% target share, up 3 percentage points from his previous season. 25.7% targets per route. That was third among tight ends behind Trey McBride and Taysom Hill, who barely counts. You could say Kincaid was second among tight ends in targets per route, meaning he's on the field, he's getting the ball. His yards per route also climbed from 1.46 in 2023 to 1.62 last year. That's a strong number for tight ends. So he just needs to find the field more. I'm not sure he's gonna. I think part of the issue last year was the injuries. I think the other part is the Bills just don't trust him as a blocker. So when they're in heavier sets or when they're going to run the ball, he's not going to be on the field. Kincaid was at a 70% route rate in 2023. If he can get back to that mark and maintain his targets per route or even dip a little bit, that would easily be enough for him to pay off this tight end 13 ADP.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that he does have some things to prove even to his coaches, that he's ready to be more durable, that he's working on his body. But as long as we don't get negative buzz from him out of training camp, I'm certainly in at his depressed ADP. On the fade side, it starts with a guy that we've talked about. If you've been paying attention to the show, you already know who I'm going to mention. It's James Cook, who's RB14 on Underdog, RB15 on Drafters, 10th in half PPR points per game last year, tied for 24th in expected half PPR points per game last year. And really, that is the case against him. He scored way above what he quote unquote should have for how he was getting the ball last year. Now you could say, yeah, he was really good though. They're going to give him the ball more. Maybe. I can't say that that's impossible, but if that's possible, why didn't they do it last year when he was doing those things? I don't think he's going to get the ball more. I think he's not going to have as much luck when he does get the ball. There's always the injury risk, and we'll see where this contract thing goes. He wants another contract, thinks he's worth more than what the team thinks he's worth. I don't think he's going to get an extension before the start of the season. We'll see if that means him missing any practice time, which could at least complicate the consideration of how ready he is for the season, how physically able he is to stand up to whatever the workload is that he gets. All those factors, I'm just out on James Cook at his price. One of my fullest fades on the entire board, especially when you look right behind him in ADP, and we've got Kenneth Walker just ahead of him, who I like better straight up. And then behind him, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Joe Mixon. I'll gladly take any two and all three of those guys straight up ahead of James Cook right now.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I mean, we're only a couple of running back spots behind ADP on Cook in our rankings, but those guys you can get a round to 2 rounds later who project similarly, if not better than James Cook. That has me off him. Cook last year in terms of like playing time and usage, he was like getting RB3 level playing time and usage. He was 36th among running backs in snap rate, 34th in route rate. He was 26th in rush attempt share, 41st in target share, just a 7.8% target share for James Cook. Obviously, he scored the league leading 16 rushing touchdowns. I will say for him, his expected rushing touchdowns, 10.3, that was 8th among running backs. He was also 11th among running backs in carries inside the 5 yards. So he did get good usage near the goal line, but he still overachieved by close to 6 rushing touchdowns. Even if he maintains the same role, he's not going to produce as he did last year. I think there's a chance that we get a bit less Cook and a bit more Ray Davis in 2025.
If a guy's biggest selling point is his touchdowns, that's the most unpredictable category that we're looking at for these players. So that just makes him a shaky bet. Khalil Shakir, not a real fade for me, Jared, but I'm leaning away from him at his wide receiver 44 ADP on Underdog, unless I'm stacking him with Josh Allen. Really nothing against Khalil Shakir. He's just okay. He's not going to score a bunch of touchdowns. He's probably not even going to catch passes at the same rate this year that he did last year. And I don't think that he's going to get more target share than he did last year. So I think he's just fine.
Yeah, I have Khalil Shakir and Josh Palmer's just fine. They're basically going where we have them ranked. I don't think either guy is exciting from a weekly upside or season-long upside perspective. For Shakir, I think he's a solid wide receiver 3. He's good at what he's good at. They use him on those short design plays. He's really good after the catch. Josh Palmer's just been okay throughout his entire career in terms of volume production. I don't think that's going to change in Buffalo, where we expect this team to be rotating these wide receivers through. The other reason I don't draft much Shakir and Josh Palmer is that I'm not going to call Josh Allen a fade for me, but I'm just not drafting much of him because he tends to be the first quarterback off the board. And I would rather have Lamar Jackson straight up. Jaden Daniels goes half a round later in most cases. Jalen Hurts goes a full round later than Josh Allen in most cases. So, I mean, I think Allen's right there with those guys, but just the fact that he goes first, I just don't end up drafting much Josh Allen.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I think he's fine in the second half of round 3. There are times if I'm drafting high enough volume, I'm like, I'm going to get some Josh Allen just in case, because Josh Allen's capable of outscoring the position by a couple of points per game. He's also easy to stack with this year because of that spread it around thing. You can choose any of the guys, any two of the guys, and there are enough of them going late enough that it's not difficult to do. But he's also going in a range where it's not hard to pass over him. And I'm drafting a lot more Jalen Hurts. Josh Allen's in this kind of tweener category for me, not a target, not a fade. Josh Palmer's there as well. Curtis Samuel, if I have Josh Allen, Curtis Samuel is a little bit interesting at the very end of a draft as one of those nobody has him. What if they finally start using him for some stretch players?
Yeah, I like Curtis Samuel. I liked him last year. I just don't see a path for him. I think he would need Shakir to miss times. I think he's basically their backup slot receiver. And he's, not, you don't want to be playing him on the outside. They're not going to be playing him on the outside now that they have Keon Coleman and Josh Palmer. So yeah, as a very last round pick, sure. But Samuel's not someone that's near the top of my target list, even in the last few rounds.
Totally agree. Miami Dolphins up next, Jared. What did their 2024 look like?
Yeah, really disappointing season from Miami last year. They were 22nd in the NFL in points, 18th in total yards, 23rd in yards per play. All those numbers way down from the previous 2 seasons under Mike McDaniel. In points, they were 11th in 2022, second in 2023. They were top 6 in yards, top 3 in yards per play in both of those seasons. The Tua injury had some to do with that. Even when Tua was in there, they weren't as explosive as they had been in previous seasons. The other note on Miami is in terms of their pass rate. If you look at the total season last year, they finished 12th in pass rate, 18th in neutral pass rate. Massive splits, though, in the games with Tua and without Tua. They were 62.9% pass in Tua's 11 games, just 57.1% pass in the other 6. So I do think we should be projecting them to pass more this season than last, assuming Tua stays relatively healthy.
Yeah, and that's what they need. There are a fair number of changes, but most of them are very little this year versus last season. The biggest change is Jonnu Smith leaving in that trade, heading to Pittsburgh, and Miami promptly signed Darren Waller after that. Much to our surprise, we didn't know that football was still in the picture for Darren Waller, but he's there. We're going to see just how much of that role he picks up. Certainly would not expect him to take all of the Jonnu Smith from last year, because Jonnu Smith should not have taken all of the Jonnu Smith last year. I think that was part of Miami's offensive struggles, the Tua injury, all the other things going on. So Darren Waller is going to be interesting, at least, even if it's not interesting fantasy-wise. But we'll see where that goes. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. Raheem Mostert is probably the next biggest name that actually left the team. Didn't do a whole lot for the team last year, which is a big part of why he left. And Jared, I honestly forget that Alexander Mattison is in until I get to something like this where I have to figure all this stuff out. And it looks like the draft market has forgotten as well, because Madison's at RB 93 on Underdog. No ADP on Drafters. People aren't even picking him at all. They did draft Ollie Gordon in round 6, but really, I think the changes at running back are creating more space for Jalen Wright than they are either of those new guys that came in.
Yeah, for sure. I think Wright is not locked into that number 2 running back job yet, but I do think he's the favorite for it. The Jonnu Smith trade is definitely noteworthy. He had 111 targets last year, 19% of the team's targets. So we'll see where those go. I'm with you, Matt. I don't think Darren Waller is going to pick up all those, even most of those. So I think that leaves some volume behind for these other guys. The other change here is that Teron Armstead retired, Miami's left tackle, and he was easily the team's best offensive lineman last year on an offensive line that was bad. The Dolphins were 28th in Pro Football Focus run block grade, 26th in ESPN run block win rate, 21st in PFF pass blocking grade, 28th in ESPN pass block win rate. So they weren't good in either facet, run blocking or pass blocking. They lose their best O-lineman. They're hoping their second year tackle, Patrick Paul, replaces Teron Armstead. He's obviously a major question mark. So the offensive line, to me, is what, if Miami's offense disappoints again in 2025, it's going to be because of the O-line.
They did also sign guard James Daniels, 3-year deal, about $8 million a year. He's an 8th-year veteran, but still just 28 years old. So that should help. They're at least trying to address it. And the other big addition in free agency was signing Zach Wilson, because if Tua goes down again, they want to make sure that they're in good hands. And I mean, whose hands can you trust more at quarterback than Zach Wilson? Jared, player targets in drafts right now, I think it's fair to start with Jalen Waddle here. He is up in ADP, probably since the Jonnu Smith trade. Wide receiver 29 on Underdog and Drafters. You can still find Jalen Waddle, though, in our underrated players article. I certainly think his upside goes well beyond that wide receiver 29 price tag.
Yeah, man, just a weird season from Waddle. Like for a guy in his prime to just kind of bomb, he had multiple issues. The volume was way down for Waddle. He had just 5.8 targets per game last year, down from 7.7 targets per game in 2023, 6.9 targets per game in 2022. And then the efficiency was down too. Career low yards per route run for Jalen Waddle, 1.53. Also set career lows in PFF receiving grade and ESPN receiver score. It is worth noting that Waddle, as you would expect, was much better with Tua in the lineup. The efficiency was actually good with Tua, 77% catch rate and 14.2 yards per catch from Waddle in games with Tua. So part of this is he just needs Tua to stay healthy. I think the offensive line being better would help. With Waddle, I'm just betting on the longer track record with this guy. He was the 6th overall pick of the 2021 NFL draft, caught 104 balls as a rookie. He was wide receiver 13 in PPR points in his second season, wide receiver 22 in year 3. And again, he's just 26 years old. So we're not worried about decline or hitting a wall at this point. He's in his prime. Yeah, I see no reason why he shouldn't bounce back this year.
Yeah, a player worth believing in and a system worth believing in. If this were a team under a different coach, really most other different coaches, I might be like, I don't know, after the way the Dolphins looked last year. But I believe in Mike McDaniel. I think he's a bright guy. I think that he's at least as well equipped as any other head coach in the league to look at last season and be like, all right, this is what went wrong. This is what we need to do differently this season to change it. And I fully believe that a large part of that fix is getting the ball to Jalen Waddle more often and in better ways, because Jalen Waddle's simply one of the better talents on their team, if not in the league at the position. We also both like Jalen Wright, I know, and that's the Mike McDaniel factor is another reason that I'm excited to draft Jalen Wright at his RB51 best ball ADP. He doesn't need to do much from there. If he gives us like 2 to 3 big weeks of production, that's a win from that level. Yep. And he could do more than that. We saw a lot more than that from Raheem Mostert over the past few seasons. If Devon Achane goes down at some point, obviously that's more work available. So especially in best ball time, I like Jalen Wright, but he's going to be somebody that I'm comfy stashing on my bench in lineup setting leagues as well.
I feel comfortable even now betting on Jalen Wright winning this number 2 job in Miami. We know Alexander Mattison is not good. I don't think Ollie Gordon is very good. The NFL seems to agree. They let him drop to the 6th round of the draft. So if Wright wins the number 2 job, at minimum, he has handcuff appeal behind Devon Achane, who is small. He's listed at 188 pounds. He's already had a concussion as a pro, plus knee, shoulder, and ankle injuries. So if Achane misses time, Jalen Wright is going to be a fantasy starter if he's that number 2 back, which again, I think he will be. There's even some chance for standalone value for Jalen Wright. But Devon Achane, they'll load him up in the passing game, but they don't want to load him up in the running game and give him, 18 plus carries per game. If you look at last year, Miami's non-Achane running backs combined for 9.9 carries and 1.9 targets per game. If Jalen Wright can soak up the majority of that, like that's enough, especially as we start to hit bye weeks, for him to be an RB3 or flex option.
Yeah, and maybe even better than that, especially in leagues of 14 to 16 teams. Achane's clearly the lead back, but definitely not a workhorse. And Achane himself, going early in round 2, it's a little bit too early to be a specific target because there are obviously plenty of other very good players in that range. We really like Jonathan Taylor among running backs in that round as well. But Achane is definitely somebody that I'm drafting in that range early in round 2, both on Underdog and on drafters, because he will get the ball plenty, assuming that this offense gets back on track and that Tua stays healthier. This is an explosive player getting lots of touches.
Yeah, definitely want to have my fair share of Achane. He's finished RB5 and RB6 in PPR points per game to open his career. What's interesting and I think exciting is that he did it with efficiency in his 2023 rookie season, 7.8 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns on 130 touches as a rookie. Last year, he did it more on volume. His yards per carry dropped to, quote unquote, just 4.5, still a good number, but way down from where it was as a rookie. But Achane had 203 carries and 87 targets. That was the second most targets among running backs. So he's done it with efficiency. He's done it with volume. What if he combines them this season? There's really exciting upside here if he can rebound in efficiency while still handling the type of volume he did last year. The Jonnu Smith trade might boost Achane more than anyone else just because they work in the same areas of the field. Jonnu Smith's ADOT was like under 5 yards last year. He was a short range target. That's obviously where Achane is going to work. So I think a lot of those Jonnu targets could go Achane's way.
I want to go to tweeners next for this team because Tyreek Hill fits that category for me. At wide receiver 13, if we get a rebound to anything close to 2 years ago, he could look like a steal at that price. but I don't know what we're getting from a post 30 Tyreek Hill, who is outside of football, just not a person that I'm comfy betting on doing things the right way. He's not a person that I trust to do what he needs to do, but he is certainly a huge talent where if he is all the way back physically and has his quarterback, he could finish this season as like wide receiver 4.
Yeah, I said this maybe a month or so ago. I still think Tyreek Hill is one of the most important decisions we have to make in fantasy football this year, because I think, like you were saying, Matt, there's a chance he's a top 5 fantasy wide receiver again this year. If you can get that in round 3, that's huge. I also think the floor is scary low. I would not be surprised if Jalen Waddle leads this team in targets this season. Hill's ADP has climbed. He was going middle to even late round 3 for a while, and I had to stop myself from taking him every single draft, because again, I just think the upside at that point, especially in these big best ball tournaments, was worth gambling on. And he's now going kind of 2-3 turn. You even see him sneak into the late second round now, which I think is about where he should be going. I still think he's a good pick there because of the upside, but I think that's about right. So I'm with you, Matt. He's no longer a draft almost every time player for me, but I'm still going to take some shots. He's 31 years old. If you look at our aging curves, 31-year-old wide receivers, you're still getting 85 to 90% of peak production on average. Aging curves differ. A speed receiver like Hill, if he loses 2 steps, he could hit the wall faster than most. But he also played that entire season last year with a wrist injury that he suffered in August, and he had to have 2 offseason surgeries. So I got to think that played a factor as well. So I'm leaning towards betting on the Hill bounce back, but I could definitely see this going either way.
And it's a concentrated target tree here. There's not a lot of guys. Nick Westbrook-Akine is not stealing targets from Tyreek Hill unless something goes very wrong for Tyreek Hill. Tua, for me, is also in this tweener category. Yeah. I'm probably drafting him only if I already have a Dolphins wide receiver on a best ball tournament team, because he's not getting there in terms of high weekly scoring without either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or both, maybe with Devon Achane. So I guess if I have one of those wideouts or Achane and Tua then makes sense at the spot where I'm looking at quarterback, then I'll take him. Otherwise, even if he falls like 2 rounds past ADP, I'm just not interested, because if I take Tua and then backdoor stack him with Malik Washington, Nick Westbrook-Akine, I'm ultimately going to be competing with Tua teams that have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. So even at the ADP advantage, I don't think I'm going to wind up getting a scoring advantage. And he's just not that exciting a player on his own.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. I think you want to have Tyreek and or Waddle if you draft Tua. And man, I've drafted a lot of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I haven't drafted much Tua, which doesn't make sense. Even if you look at, he's quarterback 22 in ADP right now. He was quarterback 15 in fantasy points per game last year. He was quarterback 18 and quarterback 9 the previous 2 seasons. So he's going later than where he's finished in points per game the last 3 seasons. He maybe should be a target for me. He just hasn't been. I'm definitely scared of the concussion thing, and I'm usually someone who will take advantage of perceived injury risk and draft those guys. But with Tua, I think it's real. He takes another hit the wrong way. He's going to miss multiple games if he returns at all from another concussion. That definitely scares me. And like you said, Matt, he's just not exciting. He's not going to give us anything rushing. He has been a volatile producer under Mike McDaniel. I think he makes more sense in best ball. When we get to lineup setting leagues, he's definitely not going to be someone that I'm looking at.
The ideal fit for Tua is you get Jalen Hurts, you get Jalen Waddle, and then you wait, and take Tua as your QB2, and then take somebody as your QB3. Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, somebody to be that insurance policy behind Tua, because you do get those spike weeks, and I think that is more important than his, scoring average, because Tua is not somebody you're going to want to put into a lineup week after week, because he's all over the place. He'll have a huge week, and then it'll be quarterback 23 the next week. So yeah, best ball guy. I'm not touching him in lineup setting, and I really only want him if I have Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle on my roster. Fades, there aren't really any fades for me anymore among Dolphins, but I sure thank goodness that I was fading Jonnu Smith before that trade to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I have Darren Waller as a fade. We'll see what happens with his ADP. We have him on our site at tight end 26. Underdog already has him at tight end 25. We'll see exactly how far he climbs beyond that. I will say for Waller, he was still good last time we saw him in 2023. He was 11th among 44 qualifying tight ends in yards per route. He was 10th in PFF receiving grade. Now, again, that was 2023. We're talking about a guy who turns 33 in September and didn't play football at all last year. So we shouldn't be betting on him being the same player that he was in 2023. Miami, obviously, made the move to go out and get him. Darren Waller said he wasn't going to come out of retirement for any team other than Miami. I highly doubt he plays anything close to the role that Jonnu Smith did, but at least we got that out of Jonnu last year. That at least kind of shows you what the upside could be for Waller.
I expect he'll be fine for them. I think he's already going a little bit earlier than he should in these drafts, so he's just kind of there for me. I actually had to check. I was like, wait a second, is Darren Waller in the draft? Oh, yeah, he just got drafted several rounds ago. All right, guess I'm not really getting any Darren Waller. On to the New England Patriots, Jared. The review of last year shouldn't be that long because there was not a whole lot of offense to speak of.
No, really bad offense. 30th in points, 31st in yards, 29th in yards per play. They had a Jacoby Brissett, rookie Drake May quarterback combo. I think they had the worst group of skill position players in the NFL. The offensive line was also horrible. The O-line finished dead last in PFF run blocking grade and ESPN run block win rates. Two different metrics had them as the worst run blocking unit in the NFL, and they were 31st in PFF pass block grade and pass block win rate from ESPN. So bottom two in every metric you could look at. Luckily, they have addressed both of those issues, the skill position group and the O-line this offseason.
We'll start with the coaches because they also addressed the coaching staff, and fair or not, they dumped Gerard Mayo after just 1 year as the head man, brought in Mike Vrabel, the former Titans head coach, Josh McDaniels, the former, and then again, and then former, and then now again, Patriots offensive coordinator. He comes in having spent 13 seasons as the New England offensive coordinator, most of that time with Tom Brady. So it's tough to really gauge how much was Josh McDaniels, how much was Tom Brady. There's absolutely no way for us to really know, but the last time we saw Josh McDaniels piloting a New England offense was in 2021, and they finished 6th in total points with rookie year Mac Jones at quarterback, with Jacoby Myers dominating targets, like 50 ahead of the next guy on the team. Hunter Henry caught 9 touchdowns, and Patriots running backs collectively scored the second most PPR points at the position. So the last time we saw Josh McDaniels in charge of the Patriots offense, it was really good, especially relative to what he had talent-wise there. Should have some better talent this year than last year. TreVeyon Henderson, they drafted early in round 2 at running back. Stefon Diggs, they signed in free agency. Kyle Williams, the wide receiver from Washington State, they drafted in round 3. And then what'd they do on the offensive line?
They spent the 4th overall pick on Will Campbell, who's going to start immediately for them at left tackle. They also signed a couple veteran free agents, center Garrett Bradbury, Morgan Moses, who projects to play at right tackle for them. So, at least 3 new starters on the offensive line, which can't be a bad thing for an O-line that was so bad last year. Yeah, I mean, McDaniels, I'm viewing him as more of a positive than a negative. He's not as exciting as Liam Cohen or Ben Johnson, but he's stable. He's been in the league. He's done this. I don't think his offense is going to tank under Josh McDaniels. He's also been a pretty adaptable play caller. You look at his run pass splits. They vary based on personnel. So I think he's willing to adapt to what he's working with. I view him as more of a positive for this offense than not.
Absolutely. I think you should. On the targets side, still not a whole lot for me here, but I will start with Hunter Henry. Similar to Dalton Kincaid, it's not that I'm specifically going after Hunter Henry, but if I'm sitting on the board looking in the range where he's going, which is tight end 20 in best ball ADP, that's a very good range for a guy that caught 9 touchdown passes last time Josh McDaniels was there and still plays for a team with, let's say, unproven talent and an injured veteran at wide receiver. So there's still opportunity for Hunter Henry to get plenty, especially in the red zone for this team.
Yeah, Henry in that season with McDaniels, 2021, he finished tight end 8 in total PPR points. He was tight end 13 in points per game. Then even last year, he was tight end 16 in PPR points per game, on tight end 10 in expected PPR points per game. Again, like you said, Matt, he's going tight end 20 in ADP. Their wide receiver core in New England is better, but it's not great. There's still plenty of room for Hunter Henry to be a top 2, top 3 target in this offense.
I like Drake May at QB 14, Jared, but I'm honestly not landing him a whole lot. Part of it is Dak Prescott being just ahead of him on all my CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens teams. I get lots of Jalen Hurts, so I also oftentimes have just kind of floating past where Drake May is going and not looking for a QB2 where he's coming off the board. I also don't need to jump on him where he's going because behind him are guys like Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, and then other later guys that I can combine for my 3 quarterback teams. What about you with Drake May?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't have as much as I at least think I should have, and maybe I want to have. I mean, Drake May, he's quarterback 14 in ADP right now. He's actually quarterback 17 in our rankings. He is part of that big 3rd tier of quarterbacks we've talked about. And if you look at our ceiling projections, Drake May's ceiling is higher than most of the quarterbacks in that range. So again, I think the quarterback 14 ADP is right. I think it's where he should be going. So he's not a fade for me, not a heavy target either at that price. He did really well last year. He was quarterback 15 in fantasy points per game in this horrible Patriots offense as a rookie. So impressive there. The passing was pretty good. The rushing is what makes him exciting going forward. 36.3 rushing yards per game for Drake May in his 10 full games. That was fourth most among quarterbacks, despite having only 14 yards on designed runs. Their previous coaching staff said last year, Mayo basically said, we're not going to run this guy because our season is meaningless at this point. We know we're not going anywhere. We're not going to put our first round rookie at risk with designed runs. I expect that to change at least a bit under McDaniels for a team that, this team has a chance to make the playoffs this year. I don't expect them to be out of it by November. I think you're going to get more designed runs for Drake May on top of all the scrambling he did last year.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a smart move by Mayo to not expose him because he was right. They weren't going anywhere. Why expose that guy to injury? They're a better coach team now. There's more talent. It's a new season, so they shouldn't start out the season feeling like they can't make the playoffs. Drake May has lots of upside. You can find him in our fantasy football breakouts article right now. So the ceiling is high. I think he's somebody I should probably try to roster a bit more in my best ball drafting going forward, just to make sure that I have some in case he winds up QB7, QB6, something like that. He also might be somebody that I target a bit more for lineup setting teams where I'm not so focused on stacking and I'm more willing to wait on quarterback. And then I'll get like Drake May and Jordan Love as my two quarterbacks, see what happens with both of those guys. If one guy becomes the player that I can just start every week, or if I just play them in better matchups off each other in some kind of platoon. Jared, the rest of this team is really neither target nor fade for me. I don't think most guys are going early enough to really be true fades. And yet there's not a whole lot for me to target, in part because we're all waiting to see how things are going to work out. Like who are going to be the starters at wide receiver. We don't really know what the run pass split's going to look like. TreVeyon Henderson is the earliest player in ADP, so I think he's the one you have to decide whether you want. He's RB22. I haven't really been drafting him. I also, at the same time, would not tell people, do not draft TreVeyon Henderson at that price.
He's fade for me right now, which is scary because I think he's a really good player and they took him early in round 2. But Henderson was a committee back in college, and I just think he's going to be a committee back, at least to open his NFL career. I think Ramondre Stevenson's going to remain involved enough to just be annoying for Henderson and cap his fantasy ceiling. Mike Vrabel talked up Ramondre Stevenson a couple months ago. He said he's going to be, quote, a large part of what we do. I think he's going to be involved, probably even at the goal line. He's a much bigger back than Henderson. Henderson's a bit undersized. RB22 is just a bit too pricey for me on TreVeyon Henderson. I'll mix him in, but he's definitely someone I'm fading more often than not.
I agree with that, but he could be Austin Eckler, and soon, because he is an early draft pick, whereas Eckler was an undrafted free agent.
Yep, that's fair. Going back to the target side for me, I got one more guy. Steph Diggs is someone I'm targeting. He's wide receiver 45 in ADP, and I get the risks. He's 31 years old, coming off an ACL. There's off-field concerns with Steph Diggs as well, but I think in this wide receiver core, he has the upside to be a guy who gets 25+% of this team's targets. Steph Diggs was still good last year before that knee injury. He was 32nd in yards per route run, 21st in PFF receiving grade among 84 qualifying wide receivers. So no longer a top-notch receiver, but I think this guy can still play, assuming that knee injury is behind him. He got a 3-year, $63 million deal from the Patriots. They feel good about the knee, at least. I don't know if they feel good about the off-field stuff after what's happened over the past couple months, but I think if Diggs is healthy and has his stuff together, he should be the clear number one receiver on this passing game that I think could be quite a bit better this year with McDaniels in Drake May's second season.
So this is why he was not a fade for me. I'm fine with taking him at that price. The reason he's also not a target for me, though, is he is older, 31, as you mentioned. He was a declining player last year in terms of how he was used. Not long ago in Buffalo, he was a big play guy, downfield, scoring of his usage type of player. Last season in Houston, he was the short range slot man, needed target volume, and he certainly is healthy in New England, but that still makes him like Khalil Shakir plus, and then throw in the ACL recovery with the age. If either one of those things was by itself, then I might be more willing to overlook it, but the combination of age plus the ACL recovery, I don't really want to bet on him. I'm okay with him, but not somebody that excites me.
Again, it's the wide receiver 45 price tag that has me in more than anything else. And actually, I'm with you. I think at this point of Diggs' career, he's going to be a short range target, which is not a bad thing. He could be a guy who catches 68% of his targets and 80 balls this season. I'll also say, though, with Houston, they have Nico Collins and Tank Dell. They had their downfield guys that kind of pigeonholed Diggs into their slot short range guy. I think there's a chance he does more downfield work in New England for a team that definitely could use that.
Yeah, but there's also a reason they paid to have him be that guy for them. Kyle Williams, wide receiver 60, fine. I don't know about him as a prospect. I know that our guy Shane was not huge on Kyle Williams, thought he was overrated as an NFL draft prospect, went in the 3rd round, certainly has opportunity. So he's just kind of at a level where I'm like, all right, I don't need any other wide receiver in this range. I'll go ahead and stick him here. But I don't know that he's got big upside this season. I'm certainly not going to overtrust him in a lineup setting format.
Yeah, Williams is not a target for me at cost right now. I didn't love him as a prospect, and I'm not convinced he's going to open the season even as one of New England's top 3 wide receivers. So not a guy I'm drafting right now.
Anybody else to focus on here?
No, that'll do it. I mean, Demario Douglas is wide receiver 72 in ADP. There's been some camp buzz on him. I do think he's probably going to get plenty of slot reps in this offense, and the slot's been an important position in Josh McDaniels' offense. So I think Douglas is someone who we could look up at the end of the season. He's caught like 60 passes in at wide receiver 72. I think that makes him worth a look, especially if you already have Drake May.
I want to like Demario Douglas, but I don't know if he's going to be playing the same position as Stefon Diggs. And the reason he's getting opportunities now is because Diggs is not playing. So that makes me hesitant now. If we get closer to the season and find out that the plans are for those two to play different spots, then I'm totally in on Douglas.
That's fair. Yep.
New York Jets to close this out. Last year was very different than this year is going to be because there were some pretty big time different guys. What are we looking at first in the review, Jared?
Yeah, and that's the big thing. It was a pretty underwhelming offense last year considering the talent they had and a quarterback with big name value in Aaron Rodgers. The Jets last year were 24th in both points and total yards. They were just 19th in yards per play. They were 30th in total plays. We've seen Aaron Rodgers throughout his career play slow. You know, he likes to, check calls at the line and just lead.
He likes to take his time, both on and off the field.
Exactly. Yeah. So just 30th in total plays for the Jets. That didn't help. But the big thing is this was a super pass heavy offense. The Jets were 4th in pass rate, 2nd in neutral pass rate, 1st in red zone pass rate. Another Aaron Rodgers thing he loves. Checking to pass plays inside the 5-yard line. Fun if you have Devontae Adams, and not fun otherwise. So the Jets last year finished 5th in pass attempts, dead last in rush attempts. As you alluded to, Matt, it's going to be a much different looking offense in 2025.
Yes, and here are some of those differences. Let's start with the coaching staff, though, where head coach Aaron Glenn is in. Offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand is getting his first shot at coordinating an NFL offense. Quarterback Justin Fields will at least be the starter for this year, got a 2-year deal that's basically guaranteeing this year's money, and then we'll see beyond that. They didn't add a whole lot of relevant players beyond that. Tight end Mason Taylor in round 2, probably going to start because they don't have a whole lot else to trust at tight end. Jeremy Ruckert, who played in college with Justin Fields, might be interesting to watch in camp. We'll see. They signed Josh Reynolds, and Josh Reynolds is reportedly leading the fight for that number 2 wide receiver job, which I think says at least as much about the other Jets receivers behind Garrett Wilson as it does about Josh Reynolds. This would be a good landing spot for Gabe Davis, Jared, but otherwise right now there's not a whole lot of fantasy relevance to this group, I don't think.
Nope, there's not. Of course, they lost Devontae Adams, who was with this team for their final 11 games last year, and he had a 29.8% target share in his 11 games with the Jets. So just a massive share of the passing game out the door and out. The total passing volume is going to be way down with their quarterback change, but Adams' departure is the biggest note here in terms of personnel. Coaching staff, I think Tanner Engstrom is a total black box. His only OC experience came in the UFL with the DC Defenders. Maybe I should dig into what that DC Defenders offense looked like. I have not done that yet.
You don't already know?
I don't know. This will be his first time calling plays in the NFL, so we can kind of guess he's going to take some stuff from Ben Johnson. But beyond that, Engstrom is a big-time wild card.
It certainly couldn't have hurt to work under Ben Johnson at the very least. Let's talk about the players now. Garrett Wilson, you just talked about the target share that left with Devontae Adams. It's Garrett Wilson and Josh Reynolds, and I don't know who else. So to me, Garrett Wilson looks good early in round 3, and I think especially for lineup setting teams, we don't know what the run pass split's going to look like, but I think one thing that we will be able to count on is weekly targets for Garrett Wilson, whatever the overall target picture is for this team, the passing volume picture. Garrett Wilson feels like a comfy pick in that range where he's going. I think he's going to push for the league lead in target share this year.
Target share, yes. Targets, no, though, because I do think it's going to be a low volume passing game. I have not drafted much Garrett Wilson. I'm not going to call him a fade. I still think he's a good player who's going to see a big target share. It's tough to make the math work on Garrett Wilson at his ADP. He's wide receiver 16 in ADP right now. We have him wide receiver 20 in our half PPR ranks, and that's with him at a 29% target share, which I'd have to look, but it's definitely a top 5 mark among wide receivers in our projections. Wilson, if you look at his last 23 games over the last 2 seasons without Devontae Adams, he's had a 28.5% target share in those 23 games. So that's kind of where we get the 29% target share for him for this year, and even giving him a bit of a boost over what he's done without Devontae Adams over the last 2 seasons. But still, you sit down and do the projections with the low overall pass volume. And I definitely have efficiency questions on Wilson with Justin Fields, who I think we can agree is a average to below average passer as a pro. And you look at Garrett Wilson's yards per target in the NFL so far, 7.5, 6.2, and then 7.2 even last year with Aaron Rodgers. He's just been below average in yards per target. And I don't think it's all on him. I think he's a good player, but he's just been inefficient, and I don't think that's going to get a big spike with Justin Fields as his quarterback.
I think it could, because his quarterbacks have been absolute filth. I mean, Aaron Rodgers last year was the best, and that was a much worse version of Aaron Rodgers than what we've gotten previously. Otherwise, it was Zach Wilson. It was Mike White. I think there was some Joe Flacco mixed in there. It's been a bad quarterback look there. And I think maybe this year we'll get our first real look at what a full season of Garrett Wilson with at least an NFL quarterback looks like. I think Justin Fields will be at least the second best quarterback that Garrett Wilson has had in his pro career, and he didn't get a full season with being number 1 to Aaron Rodgers last year because they, of course, traded for Rodgers' boo, Devontae Adams, in the middle of the year. It might be the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson's had. We'll see what this year's Justin Fields looks like versus last year's Aaron Rodgers. I'm not saying you need to draft Garrett Wilson where he's going, but I think he's relatively high floor for that range just because of the volume he's going to get.
Yeah, an argument there on the target share. I don't know, the 7.2 yards per target from Aaron Rodgers. I don't think Fields is a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers, even at this point of their careers.
Justin Fields is, however, a nice target at his QB 10 best ball ADP, especially in best ball when we don't have to decide whether to start him every week. I'll take him in that range for lineup setting as well, because Justin Fields, whatever he is as an NFL passer, been a very good fantasy quarterback when on the field.
Yeah, he's quarterback 9 in our rankings. He's also 1 3D value point behind quarterback 7. So we can make a tiny change to his projections and he'd be quarterback 7. He also has the 6th highest. I wouldn't be opposed to it. He also has the 6th highest ceiling projection at quarterback, which I think is important in this range, in this big tier of quarterbacks we're talking about. I think Fields is the guy who, if it asked me if one of these guys finishes quarterback 6 this year, Fields would be right there with Patrick Mahomes as my best guess. And it's because of the rushing, obviously. 50 rushing yards per game for Fields as a pro. That's second among quarterbacks behind only Lamar Jackson. More rushing yards per game than Josh Allen, more rushing yards per game than Jalen Hurts. Fields is going to do it with his legs. The passing, it's not irrelevant, but it's like a cherry on top. If he can have a nice passing season, that's how he gets to quarterback 6. Even if he doesn't, the rushing is going to make him a good bet for top 12 production.
Yeah, I like Justin Fields better straight up than Bo Nix and Baker Mayfield. Maybe than Kyler Murray. That one, at least I'm like, if you guys want Kyler Murray more, I'll wait until next round and take Justin Fields instead. So certainly a target for me in that range. The targets for me at quarterback go Jalen Hurts, then Justin Fields, then let's wait and see.
Fair. Me too, actually.
Breece Hall, nice at RB12, second half of round 3. Certainly somebody that I've been drafting plenty throughout draft season so far.
Me too. He's kind of my new Tyreek Hill, especially now that Hill's going early round 3. If I have a pick in the back half of round 3 and Breece Hall's there, the only reason I won't take him is because sometimes he gets to round 4 and I might just gamble that he gets back to me in early round 4. But listen, I get the arguments against Breece Hall. He was not good last year, even outside of the environment. I think Aaron Rodgers did not help him with the pass heavy offense, especially near the goal line. That didn't help Hall's production, but he also had career lows last year in PFF rushing grade, yards after contact per attempt, rush yards over expected per attempt, PFF receiving grade. So there's some questions about the player. You have Justin Fields, who's going to be a goal line threat. And then the biggest thing people are worried about is that Aaron Glenn, their new head coach, has talked up both Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis and, kind of alluded to this potentially being a, through a committee backfield. Those are all concerns. But to me, I just want to bet on this player. Breece Hall was the 36th overall pick of the 2022 NFL draft. He just turned 24 in May, so he's in his prime as a running back. He was RB7 in PPR points per game as a rookie. He was RB6 in points per game in 2023, averaged 4.8 yards per carry across those 2 seasons. So he's been an efficient runner. He's also been a productive receiver, 30 plus receiving yards per game in each of the last 3 seasons. Only 3 other running backs have done that. Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, guys who we consider to be among the best pass catching backs in the NFL. Breece Hall is right there with those guys in terms of yards per game over the last 3 seasons. He's much better than Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. And that when these guys hit the field, the coaching staff is going to see that, give Breece Hall clear lead duties in this backfield.
I'm not super worried about how he'll fit with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. We'll see what they say throughout camp. The thing I really need to hear, though, from one of the coaches, some of the coaches, is Breece Hall is going to be a focal point of our passing game, because my biggest concern for his upside with Justin Fields is I don't think the combo sets up well for check down, dump off type of targets, because we expect lower passing volume, as you mentioned, with Garrett Wilson in particular, and a lot of those plays that turn into checkdowns and dump offs for other quarterbacks become scrambles for Justin Fields, and for good reason, because they're good plays when he scrambles with the ball. So I need to hear that they're designing pass plays for Breece Hall, that they're planning to target him plenty, because he's going to need high target volume to reach his ultimate ceiling. But even without that, I think he's a good pick at where he's going.
What if I told you that Justin Fields was second in the NFL in checkdown rate last year?
And that I told you that Justin Fields played 6 games for a new team and had no wide receivers, and that's one of his seasons.
And that he was 6th in the NFL in checkdown rate in 2023.
How was he the 2 years before that?
36th in 2022, 12th in 2021.
Sounds like a jury's out situation to me.
I mean, it sounds like he checks down more than we expect a rushing quarterback to check down. I'm not saying Hall is going to dominate targets, but you consider those stats with the fact that the wide receiver core sucks beyond Garrett Wilson. Hall could easily finish second on this team in targets.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but Justin Fields also played on offenses with very little at wide receiver before, which is what we have with the Jets here. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have a high target running back to look back to as an example. And Breece Hall has had this combined issue of low rushing touchdowns and needing target volume. The year we saw the big scoring output for him, he was over 90 targets. I don't think there's a scenario this year that gets him close to that with Justin Fields. I don't think that kind of target ceiling is there. I think even second on the team is probably capping him around 70. And yeah, that would still be good versus running backs overall, but he's going to need 250 plus carries to get to the heights that we need him to in talking about big upside from where he's getting drafted.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I think 90 targets would be a lot to ask. I think 70 is definitely doable. If you see him get 15, 16% of this team's targets, he's at 70 targets. So I think that would be enough. I also think we know rushing quarterbacks help running back efficiency. So I think you're going to see a rebound in Breece Hall's efficiency, at least partly because of Justin Fields. The Jets also made some O-line upgrades this offseason, including taking Armand Membu in the first round in the NFL draft. So I think the O-line looks better than it did last year. So I also expect Hall's rushing efficiency to rebound this season.
Yeah, we both like the upside on Breece Hall. I think there's some disagreement between me and Jared on what the ultimate ceiling is. And, you know, some of the disagreement comes from our discussions offline about him. So there's going to be plenty more Breece Hall discussion on here, off here. So stay tuned to see where Breece Hall lands in our rankings as we move through the summer. Jared, the fade side, honestly, I'm not even joking. I don't think there are any other players that matter enough on this team to even be fades.
Nope, I'm not messing with Josh Reynolds. I know he's maybe the favorite for the number 2 wide receiver job. I don't even think that's going to matter, even if he holds that job throughout the entire season. Maybe in best ball, you take him in the very last round and he gives you 2 or 3 starter weeks. I could see that. But once we get into lineup setting leagues, I don't think any wide receiver is going to matter outside of Garrett Wilson. I'm not drafting Mason Taylor at cost right now. To me, he was just okay as a prospect. I do think he's going to be this team's lead tight end, but it's low pass volume. I think Garrett Wilson's going to dominate targets. I would bet on Breece Hall finishing the season with more targets than Mason Taylor. And I can get Chico Okonkwo at the same cost as Mason Taylor. I much prefer Chico Okonkwo. I can get Juwan Johnson or Theo Johnson like 2 rounds later. I think they're very similar players. So I have no interest in Mason Taylor at cost right now.
I agree with all that, even if I have Justin Fields on my team. If you want to see exactly how we project and sort all of these players for every format, check the rankings on draftsharks.com. If you want to see who makes the most sense for your specific team, then you will need to sync your league on draftsharks.com. That will automatically import all of your scoring and lineup settings, and it will create a draft war room specific to your draft, complete with tiers that are custom fit to your setup. No matter when or how you're drafting, Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.